You know what? I give up. I give up on this show. I'm not going to give up watching it, but I've given up trying to rationalize or connect it to any Batman mythos I've seen before. It's sort of like what I did with Hannibal, although Hannibal never really gave me any reason to tie it into the movies, as it were. They were clearly doing their own thing, which is clearly what the creators of this show are currently doing now. Because as far as I was concerned, Bruce Wayne was always, in any adaptation I've seen, Bruce Wayne was always the same age as Harvey Dent, roughly. Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle didn't actually meet, or at least did not become acquainted, until they had taken on the aliases of Batman and Catwoman. So clearly this show is going in its own direction, it's forming its own mythos, and while I still think that it has a little problem with its identity, I do think it's the identity that it is currently trying to set out for itself is sort of trying to come into clarity. It's not as much of a Batman show as it was before, but this episode had some issues. Now, first of all, if the episode title is any indication, this is the episode that introduces Harvey Dent. Now, this is following in the tradition that this show typically has, in that whoever the episode is named after will surely not be featured very much. And sure enough, Harvey Dent was a minor character in this episode, in the same way that Selina Kyle was a minor character in the second episode, which doesn't necessarily do much for the preconception that I originally had about this show, which was it was a marketing ploy to draw in Batman fans. So, because the episodes are basically, if I were to see these episode titles without actually watching the show, I would think, they're just trying to draw in people who like the character of Selina Kyle, who like the character of Harvey Dent. Now, obviously, watching the show, I don't necessarily get that impression, but I do think that out of the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday shows, Gotham, Flash, and Arrow, I do think Gotham is the weakest of the three for a variety of reasons. But I'm done. Like I said, I'm done trying to connect it to any kind of Batman history I've seen before. They are clearly going for their own revisionist approach. Now, this episode in particular had some weaknesses, it had some strengths. It sort of fixed some issues that plagued previous episodes, while at the same time kind of reverting back to other issues. Now the case of the week, as it were, this insane bomber, I forget his name, this insane black bomber who is very skilled at making bombs. He is abducted by these Russian thugs who were put up to steal money from Falcone by Fish Mooney, and they need this guy to get in. And Jim Gordon and Harvey Bullock are originally chasing after the guy who they thought was planning an escape, but it turns out they really had to just plan a rescue mission. Now, in addition to that, Selina Kyle is finally forced to submit to witness protection at the hands of Gordon because she has been apprehended by the police, and Gordon has her work with the sketch artist to identify Bruce Wayne's parents' killer. And since every cop in the city is basically crooked, or at least if what we've seen before is any indication, every cop in the city is crooked, so Gordon says, you should stay at Wayne Manor. So she does that, and she becomes acquainted with Bruce Wayne. Now at the same time, Gordon is planning on working the angle of the Wayne murders via this new counselor, Harvey Dent, who says that the Wayne murders may be tied in to this company, this supposedly corrupt company called Lovecraft, something like that. So this is a pretty eventful episode. Now, the pluses: Bruce Wayne finally started to act like a relatively normal kid when he was around Selina Kyle. I'm not talking in terms of hormones or anything. I'm talking in terms of actually having fun, particularly the food fight at the end. That is a scene that could have potentially been very cheesy and cringeworthy, but for the first time, it actually showed Bruce Wayne acting like a normal kid. And the kid who plays him actually was not that terrible this episode. Probably because he was dealing more with actually doing physical scenes rather than scenes where he has prolonged conversations with someone. He was boxing with Alfred. Okay, well, I can buy that he is boxing with Alfred. He is testing himself and testing how long he can hold his breath underwater. Okay, I can believe that. However, some of the dialogue between him and Selina Kyle, particularly from the Selina Kyle end, was really kind of cheesy. It was cheesy even for the sort of hyper-reality that they seem to be going for this show. Some of the lines that she was saying honestly seemed like something out of the 20s or 40s. It didn't really seem like something that a street kid would say, and that sort of diminished the believability that these two had on screen. And even some of the ways the conversations played out was pretty awkward, which it was meant to be, and the way it progressed I, for the most part, liked, because I would believe that these two would have this very back and forth relationship in that Bruce Wayne is genuinely concerned about her and providing a nice place for her to stay, and she doesn't really know how to respond to this. And at the same time, she basically opens his eyes about what life is really like on the streets and how he is very naive still. Now, all this was fine except for some of the bad dialogue. So for once, I did not particularly mind the character of Bruce Wayne. However, the villain of the week was actually pretty boring. The Bomber really doesn't have much of a personality. We are sort of told he is insane, and we never really get any indication of that, aside from the occasional twitching of his eyebrows. So the villain of the week could have been much more compelling. But once again, the most interesting part of the aspect was the Penguin. The Penguin was slowly starting to gain leverage over multiple individuals. He actually finds out about Fish's agent in that he goes to the spy's house and actually identifies her. He says, "I know what you have been doing. Your secret is safe with me." So he actually has leverage over even more people now. So once again, and even how he's playing it, he's starting to gain confidence and become a little bit more slimy. I like that. And Robin Lord Taylor plays that pretty well. Every scene I saw with him, I said, okay, this guy should be the star of the show on the villain side, because he is honestly the most interesting villain of the show. He's possibly the most interesting character on the show. Either him, Gordon, or Bullock. However, to be fair, Harvey Dent, I did feel, was portrayed correctly. I mean, even taking out the fact that I don't think he should necessarily be around yet or in Gotham yet, he was portrayed well. I don't necessarily know the guy who plays him, but they did have the schizophrenia angle down, and that was actually one of the things I was wondering about. Were they going to have the schizophrenia? Because Aaron Eckhart, I love Aaron Eckhart's portrayal of Harvey Dent, but one common complaint I've heard is that they didn't have the multiple personalities. This one did, but without shoving it in your face. They gave you just enough to let you know that he has a problem with, or a potential problem with, multiple personalities, but at the same time, we only got a taste of it. So there's still plenty of room for more expanding on that in future episodes. But again, he was a little underused, or very underused. But for a character that they just pulled out of seemingly nowhere, I did feel that he was a worthy addition to the show. I actually would not mind seeing more of him. He's actually more interesting than a lot of the characters that we've seen up to this point. For instance, Nigma. I still don't really like Nigma. He occasionally gets a good line. For example, when he was listening to the radio questionnaire thing while he was in the lab, I thought that was something that a young Riddler would do. And Harvey Dent, despite the fact that I think he's a little bit too far down the line, this could just be bias coming from someone who has seen multiple adaptations of the character before. While I do think he's a little too far down the line in terms of reaching where he will eventually end up when he faces Batman, again, I did think he was portrayed correctly. I can buy this guy as Harvey Dent. he seemed to have a whole lot of charm. I bought both sides of his personality. I like how he could switch at the drop of a hat. So while this episode did have some flaws, I was still fairly entertained. But the flaws in an otherwise solid episode really kind of stood out. But I will say this. While the episode started off pretty slow and I wasn't particularly interested, as the episode picked up and some revelations were unveiled and some relationships started to build, I got more and more interested, to the point where I'm actually sort of looking forward to the fall finale, as it were. However, I'm not aware of any other episodes following the fall finale, which is confusing considering Fox recently ordered a full 22 episode order. But again, we'll just see where it goes. Some ups and downs for this particular episode. And once again, I'm done trying to connect this to any prior interpretation of the Batman mythos. This is clearly going in its own direction. They are clearly not trying to match this up with anything we've seen before. Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle are essentially roommates now, or not roommates, but housemates now, or at least for the time being. So taking all of my prior knowledge and shoving it under the rug, I was able to buy it a bit more. It did not seem right at first, but where they went with it, I think was and could potentially lead to some interesting stuff. Like I said, we finally got some insight into Selina and what her goals were, at least long-term goals were, and again, we saw Bruce Wayne finally act like a normal kid. So this episode, definitely a mixed bag, like a lot of episodes this season, actually.